On December 1, 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, and it was confident that it was done by the countries that were requesting ownership of a share in the Antarctic, where he pledged to stop their intentions to take out their quotas for an indefinite period, for letting me establishing scientific research among all countries in a neighborhood. The Institute called for peaceful research to be conducted on the village only, and prohibited any attempts to mining of minerals for at least 50 years among 12 countries. The beginning of the questions was what motivates 12 great countries to race to share the military pieces in this place that they described as the frozen and barren land. And what are the minerals that were forbidden to extract in the first 50 years and became allowed because? What is the nature of the scientific research that has been conducted on this land for more than half a century? And what is the story of Admiral Richard, who spoke about the secret of the land beyond the South? The year 1959 was not the beginning of the story, but rather its end, because the story of the discovery of the icy land of the South is very old. It appeared in the maps of the Chinese, Western explorers, and Muslims in the form of land, great frozen surrounding the earth like a wall. And these were the maps left by the famous Ottoman geographer and Captain Pierre Rains in 1528, the first concrete evidence of the existence of ice ground. In the days went by until the beginning of the 20th century, when the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen managed to reach the frozen southern mountain, and this prompted the Nazi Party to send a secret group called the Ethyl Association. In the early part of the last century, it includes an elite of Earth scientists who have old carrots, with a member dating back to the 16th century. Some of them dating back to the Ottoman Empire are the goal of a trip to explore the land of ice. Those who were completely sure of the existence of post-polar lands and did not, the Radians, were the only ones who were searching for the secret of the South, and the Americans were also under supervision. Richard Evelyn Burke, he is a navigator and Commodore of the United States Navy, an explorer of the Antarctic and Arctic regions, pilot and navigator of COM in the period between 1928 and 1957, with many works that he surpassed others in the exploration of the frozen and barren continent of Antarctica. Specifically on February 16, 1947, Richard made his second voyage over Antarctica, where he announced in a message to him before flying that he should see this land beyond the pole again, because he discovered with the former American squad an aerial equivalent in dimensions to Germany and France, and prepared comprehensive maps of it until 1956 came and everything changed. I'll tell you what Richard saw at the end of the episode. Why do so many countries want a piece of the Arctic cake? Former US President Donald Trump made international headlines August 2019 when he expressed his interest in buying Greenland, the world's largest island, which teeters on the edge of the Arctic Ocean. But Greenland is clearly not for sale, and Trump has been widely derided for his diplomatic blunder. However, many wondered what could be behind this unprecedented move, and if it had anything to do with the United States' growing interest in owning part of the Arctic. Richard Powell, a polar geographer at the Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge, says, in the United Kingdom in a report for Live Science, climate change is also opening up previously ice-locked Arctic waters, making the region more accessible than ever before. The new Cold War. Because Russia and the United States are big poles in the battle. But despite the opportunities the region presents, can the Arctic Ocean be owned by anyone? Why do so many countries want a stake in this spectacle of icebergs and bears polar? According to Live Science, there is a direct answer to the second question. As the Arctic has huge reserves of oil and gas, the seafloor under the Arctic Ocean holds an estimated 90 billion barrels of oil, equivalent to about 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves, and an estimated 30% of the planet's untapped natural gas, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. A century ago, this vast mineral wealth was inaccessible because we lacked the technology to exploit it. At that time, nations were limited to exploring a small part of the sea along their coasts, while regions of the distant oceans, such as the depths of the Arctic, were classified as the high seas that did not belong to any country. Greater influence for whoever owns the North Pole. Arctic division very soon. The process of deciding on those allegations per se will probably take decades, Powell says. Some expect it to be 2 decades. Even if countries get the green light, they will then have to pay the hefty expenditures to move their ships to the Arctic, build deep-sea infrastructure, and extract oil and gas from miles below the surface. Difficulties and an isolated environment, says Powell. This area remains an isolated environment. There are difficult seas and icebergs, and it is very difficult to get insurance to work in them. There are a whole host of other issues regarding whether this is practical. The mysteries of the first ever map of the North Pole. Gerard Mercator's 16th century attempt at mapping the Arctic includes such guesses as a giant whirlpool and polar pygmies. By Kara J. Moe. These days, climate scientists are looking hard at Arctic maps. As winter sea ice shrinks and cracks appear, they try to understand the reasons for these changes and determine what we should expect in the future. Centuries ago, though, when people tried to map the Arctic, they weren't too concerned with what was happening to it. They just wanted to know what the heck was up there. And if they didn't know, they pretty much made it up. Such was the case with the first known map of the Arctic, the Septentrionalium Terrarum, which is filled with magnetic stones, strange whirlpools, and other colorful guesses. The map's creator, the Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator, is best known for the Mercator projection, the now famed method of taking the curved lines of the Earth and transforming them into straight ones that can be used on a flat map. The Mercator projection was invented for sailors, who, thanks to its design, could use it to plot a straight line course from their point of origin to their destination. In 1569, Mercator came out with a map of the world based on this principle, which stretched from east to west and promised, in his words, no trace of any of those errors which must necessarily be encountered on the ordinary charts of shipmasters. In order to make his map useful for navigation, though, Mercator had to sacrifice accuracy in other areas specifically. He had to stretch out the top and bottom parts of his map, making the lands and seas in the far north and south appear disproportionately larger than those nearer the equator. This is also why so many people think Africa is the same size as Greenland, when it is really about 14 times bigger. The Mercator projection is still very common in schools. Under the terms of this Mercator map, the North Pole would appear so large as to be almost infinite. So instead of including it in the overall projection, Mercator decided to set a small, top-down view of the Arctic in the bottom left corner of his world map. Geographical historians consider this to be the first true map of the Arctic. Over the subsequent decades, as new information came to light, Mercator and his proteges enlarged and updated this original map. The draft above is an attempt from 1606, updated by his successor, Jodocus Hondius, but those original bones remained in place. By the 1500s, not very many people had ventured up to the Arctic. No explorer would set foot on the pole itself until 1909. This didn't stop Mercator, who dug into some dicey sources to suss out what he should include. The most influential, called Inventio Fortunata translation. Fortunate Discoveries was a 14th century travelogue written by an unknown source. In Mercator's words, it traced the travels of an English minor friar of Oxford, who traveled to Norway and then pushed on further by magical arts. This mysterious book gave Mercator the centerpiece of his map, a massive rock located exactly at the pole, which he labels Rupus Nigra Altissima, or Black, very high cliff. The presence of this formation was widely accepted at the time. Most people thought it was magnetic, which provided an easy explanation for why compasses point north. But Mercator was not quite convinced by this argument, and included a different rock, which he labels Magnetic Pole, in the top left corner of the map, just north of the Strait of Anian. Mercator draws the Arctic in 4 large chunks separated by channels of flowing water, which meet in the middle in a giant whirlpool. He got this idea from 2 16th century explorers, Martin Frobisher and James Davis, who each made it as far as what is now northern Canada. Both documented their experiences with vicious currents, which, they wrote, pulled giant icebergs along like they were nothing. Without cease, it is carried northward. They're being absorbed into the bowels of the earth, Mercator wrote on his original map. Each piece of the Arctic also has particular qualities. According to Mercator's labels, the one in the lower right is supposedly home to pygmies, whose length is 4 feet, likely another reference to the Inventio Fortunata, which described groups of small-statured people living in the polar regions. It's possible that the author of the Inventio was referring to the indigenous inhabitants of Lapland. The one next door, on the bottom left, is apparently the best and most salubrious of all the chunks, although no evidence is given to support this or to explain why the pygmies wouldn't want to live there. Instead, after Mercator died in 1594, explorers continued to gain new knowledge of the Arctic, and cartographers revised their view of both poles. By 1636, up-to-date maps of the region like Mercator's 4 regions, along with the Rupus Nigra and the Central Whirlpool. Instead, they showed one large piece of land, surrounded by small islands and, often, adorned with the ship's routes that enabled this geographical knowledge in the first place. As we peer at modern Arctic maps, wondering what changes are ahead, it's fascinating to think back to Mercator's original version, mysterious and broken from the beginning. Map Monday highlights interesting and unusual cartographic pursuits from around the world and through time. Read more Map Monday posts. Reasons for the existence of huge oil reserves in the deserts and the Arctic. Questions answered by a report published by the American Oil Price website. The author of the report, Alex Gimani, says that a group of analysts expect demand for oil to return to levels close to the levels reached before the epidemic, while others expect a deficit and a rise in prices. Most experts agree that fossil fuels will remain the most widespread energy source for a decade, perhaps even 2, depending on the speed of the energy transition, and the U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in the northeastern part of Alaska has a reserve. The Secrets of Richard Evelyn Byrd. Richard Byrd said in his memoirs that on his second voyage over the North Pole, "It is not easy to believe, But God is capable of everything, as he mentioned that he irrigated 2 mountains the likes of which he had never seen in his life before, and a small river flowing from the middle of the mountains, and thick forest trees on the mountain slopes. How many he discovered according to a bird that controlled his entire plain. And his city will never be seen like his camel, he continued, saying that he was chosen and allowed to enter this world to be a witness to his existence. He mentioned that he met with one of the world leaders in the depths of the earth, the one who conveyed a message to the outside world. His book responds to the message he heard from the gates of that place, according to his description, and mentioned it as follows. Your atomic wars of yours have reached a point of no return. Your war may destroy our inner world and the whole world. And when you hit Japan, we tried to contact you, but our efforts have failed, and we have received nothing but hostility and hatred from you. You rain fire on our planes and our chariots out of your deep-seated hatred, and that's why I tell you, my son, there is a great black storm gathering on the world now, and it is coming to you and will not go for many years, and will trample the wars that you will receive, every flower of your cultures. The recent wars that took place in your world are only the beginning of what is yet to come of wars. And we see the matter more of you with each day that becomes clearer. I said, do you mean that we will go back to the dark ages and technology will be completely over? He said, yes, my son, wars brought us into the era of darkness, and because of your wars, a dark cloud will cover the earth, and many of your race will perish. After that time we will come again to help you, and we will return your culture and civilization to you. I can't tell you more than this. And he said, now, my son, you will return to the outside world to deliver this message to them. They say that Admiral Richard let us leave to deliver the message, and when I reached out to the U.S. government about this incident witnessed by the crew of a team, I had to hide it completely and not talk about it under any circumstances, and it was considered one of the top secret government issues. I do not know whether this secret will see the light or not,